Look, this happens every year. It's happened with the Clippers, and it now happens with the Bucks. After a team has a disappointing playoffs for a number of reasons, I think Budenholzer didn't necessarily make the right rotations. Bledsoe was clearly woeful in the playoffs. Giannis was underdone. He wasn't great against the Heat, and Middleton had a big load to carry, which we'll talk about in a bit. But the reality is the Bucks disappointed against the Heat. Even though a lot of people thought the Heat would win because the matchup was ideal for them, the Bucks still disappointed not making it out of the second round and doing so in a pretty poor fashion, losing in 5. It happens every year that when that happens, people forget how good this team actually is and just start to heap criticism onto them instead of looking for bright spots, instead of looking for a reason that they might come back better than ever. And that's exactly what's happened to the Bucks. And no, I don't think people have forgotten about them. Clearly, that's not the case. I'm just saying that in the grand scheme of things, when you've got teams like the Nets that everyone is so high on now, I mean, who would have thought KD and Kyrie would be really good at this NBA thing as a pair? Not me. No, that's a crazy thing to think. But yeah, anyways, those guys are now garnering the attention, and you've got the Heat team, the 76ers, all these different teams that look as though they're trending up, when some people potentially think the Bucks might have been trending down after having a bad playoffs. Just the whole mindset and perception of that team changes, when in reality, it doesn't need to be, because it's still the same team. It's actually a far better team than they were last year, and for a number of reasons, which we'll talk about. But before I even talk about that, if you could drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, that would be much appreciated. But anyways, let's get into the video. But before I even get into the Jrue Holiday trade and all of that, because obviously that's a big reason why the Bucks are still favorites to come out of the East, I want to talk about some of the more subtle and some of the more underrated moves. Let's start with DJ Augustin. I mean, that went completely under the radar, but this is someone that 2 years ago was starting every game for a playoff team and had that infamous game 1 against the Toronto Raptors where he popped off and led their team to victory. That's the kind of player DJ Augustin is. He had a bit of a down year last year, coming off the bench for Markelle Fultz, but you're bringing in someone that can shoot the ball, who can play make. He can be the point guard in closing lineups with Holiday running the 2 and then Middleton at the 3, Giannis at the 4 and Lopez at the 5. You could experiment a few different lineups as well, aside from that, which we might talk about, but he can play the 1 in the starting lineup, and more importantly, he's going to give you a punch off the bench. I mean, we just saw in the Warriors game, he dropped about 13 points in a matter of 13 minutes, and that was a blowout, but that's the kind of production you can get from Augustin. You can give him 20 minutes a night, and he might give you 10 and 5, which is perfectly fine and really good considering they got him for next to nothing. You then have other guys that they brought in with playoff experience in Bryn Forbes and Torrey Craig. Forbes is someone who's been around 40% from 3 the last 2 years. He was starting on a pretty decent Spurs team last year, and he's a knockdown shooter. If you're bringing him off the bench, I mean, that's a very good pickup as well. Bobby Portis brings some kind of punch off the bench as someone who can potentially stretch the floor. Maybe if you choose to have Giannis at the 5, or just as someone who can come off the bench and give you quick production as a scoring kind of guy. And then you've got the defensive-minded guy who was just playing in the playoffs for the Nuggets and is someone you want on your team, and that's Torrey Craig, who isn't the best shooter, isn't the best offensive player, but you've got enough offensive production now, I think, with Jrue Holiday, with Chris Middleton, with DiVincenzo, with all of these guys, that if you bring in someone like Torrey Craig into the starting lineup, maybe in the playoffs, or maybe into like a death lineup where you've got Giannis running the 5, Craig at the 4, Middleton at the 3, DiVincenzo at the 2, and Holiday at the 1, that's a really, really good defensive lineup that is going to really stifle a lot of opposition teams. They just had a really underrated free agency outside of the major move that was obviously Jrue Holiday. And let's talk about Holiday. He brings everything they need. I think everyone's going to talk about his shot creation and his defense, but I think more specifically, his defense against guys like Jimmy Butler. That was what cost the Bucks in the end. When you look back at the first couple of games of the series, which are the swing games, if you lose the first 2 games in a neutral setting, it's going to be hard to come back from. I know the bubble is something we haven't seen before, so we can't really compare it to anything, but losing the first 2 games of a series in a neutral setting are always going to be hard to come back from, and that's exactly what happens. And Jimmy Butler got off the leash in both of those games, and it was because they had no one that could go to him and just shut him out of the game. And I'm not saying Jrue Holiday is going to shut him out of the game, because normally good offense beats good defense, but Holiday's going to make it a lot harder than anyone on that Bucks team has been able to make it for these kind of guys in the past. And that's just going to be a huge difference. Instead of asking Giannis to go out and guard someone who's 6 inches smaller than him and is in a direct matchup, let Giannis do what he does best, which is make the right rotations inside, leading to blocked shots, close out shooters if need be, and occasionally switch on to guys like Jimmy Butler. If he needs to, he can do that. But at the same time, you don't want that to be a direct matchup. That's not his ideal situation. Holiday, on the other hand, is someone that you're going to put in front of Butler, and he's going to create all kinds of issues. I mean, we've already seen that in their first game against the Warriors, where he was hounding Stephen Curry, and he did a pretty good job of hounding Curry. But outside of his defense, I mean, we've seen his offense in the first game of the season and then his defense in the second game. We saw him lock up Steph Curry in the most recent game, and then in the first game, he dropped 25 points and showed exactly what you wanted to see. He's someone who can create tough shots when it's not falling for Giannis or when they can't get something else to fall, which is important because it's only been Chris Middleton in the past who can create shots from the perimeter. I mean, you look at guys like Bledsoe who have turned into a shell of their former self in the playoffs. There's no other team in the NBA that has had success with as fewer creators as the Bucks have had, and that's why the Bucks haven't had success. Look at the Lakers, Anthony Davis, LeBron James, obviously two ridiculously good creators, so that's almost enough in itself, but then even Rondo stepped up in the playoffs more than someone like Bledsoe. Now they've got in Schroeder. They know you need multiple playmakers, and that's what they've got. Teams like the Clippers, the Nuggets, the Heat, all of these really good teams, the Celtics, have multiple creators, which is what the Bucks haven't had. I mean, Bledsoe, in theory, was that guy, but he just wasn't in the playoffs, and it led to a knock-on effect. When Bledsoe's doing nothing and the team doesn't have to worry about him, it just means more pressure goes onto Middleton and Giannis, and that's why their efficiency and their outcome comes down a bit. But now you have Jrue Holiday, who can create on the outside and the inside. He can get to the rim. He can shoot from beyond the arc. He's not a fantastic shooter, but he's a much better shooter than Bledsoe, or at least he's probably going to be a better shooter than Bledsoe in the playoffs. Well, that's almost impossible not to be, so he will be. He's going to be a better shooter than Bledsoe in the playoffs. That's established. And then he just does a number of other things that just you won't get from other players that they've had in the past. And all of a sudden you have that second creator on the perimeter alongside Middleton. And that just makes Middleton's game a lot easier. And I think Middleton is one of the most underrated players in the entire NBA. He's a top 25 player. He had a fantastic regular season last year, and his playoffs were criticized when in reality, his first two games against the Magic, I don't know what he was doing. He was terrible. Let's just say it as it is. He was bad. But outside of that, against the Heat, he had Giannis injured for half of that series. He had no other shot creator around him, and he was asked to do so much of the creation against one of the best defenses in the league. Guys like Jason Tatum struggled against the Heat. Middleton was asked to do all of that shot creation from outside, and he ended up carrying that team without Giannis to a victory in Game 4, dropping like 36 points. The whole Middleton thing was just a bit hypocritical because people were talking about how he can't be a second option or a first option, but then when he was asked to be a first option against one of the best teams in the league, and more importantly, a fantastic defense, then people are criticizing him for being inefficient. It's like, make your mind up. If you don't think he's a first option, you can't then criticize him for when he has to be a first option because of injuries and because of lack of creation from guys like Bledsoe. I mean, do you see the contradiction going on here? Maybe it's just me, but I think that's kind of contradictory. Anyways, I think Middleton has already shown that with Jrue Holiday alongside him, he can take his game to another level. People think of him as a 20-point per game scorer because he's only really played like 29 minutes over the last few years, but if you round that up to 36 minutes a game, like guys like Donovan Mitchell, like guys like Devin Booker, who people always want to put well ahead of Middleton, his numbers are very similar and his efficiency is fantastic. Chris Middleton, if he's a second option or a third option, he's one of the better ones in the entire NBA, not to mention he's a good defender as well. His playmaking is incredibly underrated, and I think he might take an even bigger step this year in terms of his playmaking. If he can get that playmaking to the next level, which he's already taken it from okay to good last year, if he can take it from good to like, not elite, but the rung below elite, that would be fantastic, and that would really help the Bucks as well, having two really good creators from the outside to surround Giannis. There's no reason this Bucks team isn't the favorite. I'm a huge fan of KD and Kyrie and the Nets, but the defense on this team, the defensive possibilities to have Middleton, Giannis, Lopez, Holiday, and DiVincenzo, or Augustine, Torrey Craig, all these interchangeable guys on the floor at once, that's so much defensive ability. That's so much switchability. And now they've got players who can create shots outside of Giannis and Chris Middleton. This has to be the favorite to come out of the East. It just has to be. And I think people are forgetting about the Bucks. Now, just another thing I have to cover is Giannis did sign that contract extension. I think it's something that you can't tangibly and physically see. You can't see on the court that Giannis signing that contract extension has led to Middleton making a couple of extra shots. And I'm not saying that's a direct knock on, but you know what I mean? The locker room confidence might have gone up. Guys like Middleton, who are already locked into the Bucks organization, having Giannis there for another 5 years. Those kind of players, Lopez, all of these guys that want to win a championship, everyone can breathe easier with Giannis now locked up. And it's not something that you can tangibly see, but it's something that's going to make a difference. And in a stacked Eastern Conference where anything can make a difference, where just a little bit of confidence, a little bit of culture can change the impact of a game and a series, that could be a big thing. Giannis now signing that deal could really change the headspace of a lot of these players, and it might be the difference between them not making it out of the second round and making it through to the finals. I know it's a small thing, but those small things are huge in the grand scheme of things in such a tightly contested conference. Other than that, I don't know if there's anything else I need to cover. I think the Bucks clearly addressed their biggest issues, which was shot creation on the outside alongside Middleton, and I think Middleton's going to benefit from this. I also think Holiday's going to benefit from how good Middleton is, and people might start to realize that he's one of the better players in the entire NBA. Middleton, he's an incredibly underrated player. So I think he's finally going to break out in the playoffs and show everyone what he can be. Overall, this Bucks team looks a lot better. They've made some improvements to the bench. If Budenholzer can leave guys like Giannis and Middleton in the game for more than 30 minutes in the playoffs in do-or-die games, that would help, and hopefully he'll do that. Maybe that's the difference between them making it out of the second round and not. So that's another thing that I haven't made note of, but yes, that could be important. Just a number of factors have led to this Bucks team being even better. I don't know why people are kind of forgetting about the Bucks. I know people still have them around the top, but I think people are kind of standoffish about them until they prove themselves in the playoffs, but I'm pretty sure that they're going to be a very hard team to beat come playoff time, and I'd have them as my favorites to make it out of the East. If you did enjoy the video, a like would be greatly appreciated. Other than that, I'll catch you next time. Bye.